Hello, in Malta. We're going to discuss this painting by Gianni Vella. Gianni is John in English, just for the record. So if you go to the Farmhouse of Malta, you'll find amongst the 20th century artists, there are a dozen perhaps of very well-known names which are sought by the dealers, the collectors, the sale owners, of course. And they are plentiful, and they tend to be small. This is the 20th century ones. If you go back to the 18th century and 19th century and a bit before, there is a huge amount of stock in Malta, privately owned, institutionally owned, trade owned, and a lot of it comes from abroad, gets repatriated, and it churns around. Some of it stays in families, some of it comes from deceased estates, some of it comes from divorces, some of it comes from bankruptcies, etc., etc. And the collectors will buy abroad with a huge willingness in Malta. They will not worry about import costs to the degree someone in England would perhaps, because it's an island, the mindset is slightly more open to moving things. So these pictures come up, and every 100 years there's a whole another layer of pictures put into this stock, and we're in 2022 now, and even in the 22 years of this century there was a whole another layer, another century of work being coalescing in Malta. And if you look at England as an example, the Hirsts, the Bankses are a good example of this top-up of stock. So it's not a question of a vanishing amount of stock. It's an ever-replenishing font of work. And not only are we talking about pictures, we're talking about sculpture, we're talking about pottery, we're talking about glass. The Medina glass, for example, is a relatively new form of Maltese art. And at the other side, you have types of Maltese art which is dropping off the cliff. For example, filigree. No one wants filigree in Malta anymore, particularly. They don't want cigarette cases. They don't want so many crucifixes. There isn't the type of tourist that wants to go and buy filigree. It has to be cleaned, stop the tarnishing. It's a precious item which is vulnerable to loss and theft. Do people want silver? Most tourists don't want silver. They'll buy a piece of glass, they'll buy a decanter, buy an ashtray, an olive oil bottle. So it's an interesting thing. So let's look at this picture. It sits within this whole bandwidth of different types of picture, different types of collector, different types of usage and ownership. And the thing about these dozen or so names, Vella, Bartholet, Apap, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they are names that you see, and they do command high prices, which is a regretful thing, because it means that an amateur collector of paintings is really up against it. They're not going so much up against institutional pictures, collectors of pictures like museums. They're going up against household buyers, collectors who not only want to buy them to have as status items, it's seen as quite a stable investment. And if you have a picture like this, unlike stocks and shares, you haven't got to pay the stockbroker to look after it every year. You don't have to pay tax on it every year and assess its value every year. It goes into the pot. It's your possession. No one from the government is coming around saying, well, what's your Vella worth at the moment? We want our share. It's a very cheap thing to own, other than insurance or risk of theft, as I said on other videos, but the risk of theft is really quite low in Malta. And traditionally these things can be inherited. In Malta there's no inheritance tax, whereas in England there is. So in England, if this was inherited, the government would want you to tell you what it's worth, and they would want their share. But in Malta it's a different sort of thing still, for the moment anyway. So we have these pictures which get passed around and kept and used. Some are used as investments, some are used as things, I said, for status, things for appreciation of the aesthetic beauty. Appreciated not only by the owner, but by the social set of friends and associates. So this picture I bought this year in Malta, and the first comment is it's an oil on board, and many pictures of this nature are watercolours. Now I do like watercolours, I have an awful lot of them, as you can see if you go on the website. But if you have a flat in Malta or a nice big sunny villa, you put a watercolour on the wall, you're using its lifespan because they're fading. And if you have an oil painting, such as this one, you don't have that problem. So that is, for Malta, for the investor who wants to look at the picture, it's really very important. If you hang, as I say, a watercolour of the same nature, a Carolina ding, for example, put it in your hallway and it gets sun on it, it's going to dull and down over years. And if it stands in the sun for 20 years, it'll lose a third of its colour. So I like the fact that it's an oil-on panel. There's no point in me reading to you what it says in all the Vella books. It's just a waste of time. He was prolific. He has quite a distinctive style. He did a lot of church work, and he lived a long time, Victorian era, all the way through to the end of the 20th century. So he saw a lot of change in Malta, and his output was varied and consistently voluminous. Now, we'll talk about the actual painting. A good blue, it's a Mediterranean sunny blue. You have a square hut or house or tower. It's most likely to be a farmhouse or farm building. You have a box on the roof, which is most likely to be a staircase to the roof. It could be water storage, but I think it's going to be a way onto the roof. I don't think it's a military tower like one of the Martello towers they have in Malta, because it hasn't got the angled ramparts or the steps for the drawbridge. So it's an agricultural building with characteristic small windows. They have in Malta traditionally small windows to keep out the heat. But it's a flat roof. It's definitely Malta. You have the prickly pears, which in this case have got fruit on. You have some red, I don't know what the flower is. It could be a number of different types of vegetation. Down here, I don't know what they are. I think they could be beehives, but I'm not sure what they are exactly. It could be chicken boxes for keeping chickens in, I don't know. Chicken coops. You have some blue outlines of, I think they're trees. And the use of blue to paint vegetation is quite common. In fact, if you look at Impressionists, they will use blue an awful lot to paint distant vegetation, not close vegetation. It could be a shaped roof, but I think it's more likely to be trees, in my opinion. And over here you have the indication, or perhaps of a village in the background. You have square globs of paint in these bright masonry tones. So a very clear signature, painted in oil, not painted in pen or ink. It's painted in oil paint. It's probably one of the same colours he was using on the actual painting. So it's a small painting, but it's one that can be hung confidence. It's colourful, it's Maltese, and certainly Malta, they want to buy Maltese artists and Maltese subjects. The two together is an intoxicating thing for a Maltese buyer investor. The frame is an ordinary frame, and I suggest that when this was painted, I think it says Farmhouse actually up there, which is what I thought, Farmhouse. I think that W5, that perhaps is a number for a gallery or an exhibition, so it's probably been hung in a hotel or something, and we had a number of pictures with numbers on. So I don't know what's happened to the label, where it's gone. So this probably was framed at the time the painting was done, and if I haven't had it out of the frame, I can't see a date, but if I had to date it, I'd say 1960, just as a guess. That's the sort of frame we have. It's a sprayed gold effect, modern frame with glass, with a mounting. This doesn't need glass. This is framed as he would have framed, or any framer would have framed a watercolour. And I feel that if this was framed now by a gallery, they would be tempted to not use glass. The problem really with glass is the reflective problems. Yes, you can get non-effective glass, but this doesn't look very, very good, I don't think. If you do frame it without glass, then you lose the opportunity to have a margin, you lose the opportunity to extend the picture. So there are issues associated with not using glass. I suspect underneath the margin, the paper margin, there is the margin of the actual painting, which probably will be a piece of, it could be board, it could be paper mounted to board, it could be just a piece of board, and there'll be a scruffy edge. If it was paper, it would have pinholes in it. If it's a board, it might have just a cut, clean edge. It might have had a border sort of scraped on or painted on. So I don't know what's underneath. And as I say, I am making this subject. This is painted on board. I think it is. But as I say, it could be something stuck to the board. But there's certainly no curl to it. There's certainly no distortion to it. And the feeling is, I've asked people, the feeling is it is on panel. It could be artist panel. It could be salvaged wood. So it could be sort of something he found or something he bought from an artist supplier. Okay, so we have the lights coming in, we have the shade, we have these quite pinky white tones for Malta. You don't often find that. It's usually they use the yellows in Malta for the masonry. But this is not a Spanish or Moroccan thing. This is really 100% going to be a Maltese picture, especially with the prickly pears. So we've discussed the market briefly. We've discussed what we have here. Are they worth the money? Well, they are. If you buy from a dealer such as me, there is going to be, I will of course put a margin on it. The dealers, sorry, the sale rooms, if you're selling pictures, they will of course take a selling commission and a buying commission. In Malta, the commissions are very low for various reasons. If I'm selling it in England, the buyer would pay 27 to 30% buyer's commission on top of the hammer price, and the vendor would have a commission of 15% plus that, and there might be sundries such as photography, insurance, blah blah blah. So the great difficulty with this stuff is there is quite a high cost of selling it if you use an auction. If you use a dealer, you again have the same issue. The dealer will want a margin, and there is an element of tax within that margin, of course. But the thing is, when you're buying these pictures, is you've got to be quite selective, and it's not just a simple thing as saying, "Oh, buy what you like, buy what you like." That's quite good advice, but it's quite one-dimensional. You've got to consider, as I say, the signature on the subject. You've got to consider it's the right signature. I know that sounds very silly, but really you must be very careful. Some are attributions, some are not the right signature. Sometimes the signature's on the back, and you're starting to stretch the credibility and the value if it doesn't look right. There are some scenes which are not saleable. Traditionally in England, religious scenes were not valuable. That's not the same anymore. But there are some scenes which perhaps people don't want so much. I think in the market, this is a very pleasant, spot-on scene. If that was painted by, I'm going to pick one out, Lucien Pissarro, who painted them just like this in France and England. He painted the vegetation and the sky in the same way, and the same scale, and the same intensity, and the same manner. In fact, when I saw this picture, I thought that was a Lucien Pissarro, who I have been trying to buy recently and haven't had much luck. And I go for this. If it was a Lucien Pissarro, it would be 15,000 in England. You can get some cheaper ones, but they are sketchy, and they're sketchy in terms of being like a sketch, and they're less colourful, somewhat rushed. But a good one like this, you're talking 15,000 or more. But the thing about this, again, the reason I thought it was Pissarro is because you have these blues, so lavender colours and distant tree colours. If you look at the Blue Ridge Mountains, Virginia, they're called blue because the green pine forest look blue in the distance, just an atmospheric thing. So you will see this. In fact, there's a Lear in Malta on the market at the moment with St Agatha's Tower in Gadara, Melilla Bay, and the olive groves. There could be orange groves. The olive groves are painted in blue. This purple lavender blue. So for me, it's quite a good colour. I thought, just the first impression was it looked like a southern French impressionist picture. So we have the pedigree. I think he is aware of what the Impressionists are doing when he painted this. And I think he is trying these colours, these bright commercially appealing colours, aesthetically pleasing colours. It's nothing like the pictures of Jesus on the cross that he would do for behind an altar, for example. So we have the Vella. It's in Malta. If you're a collector, you can buy it off me, and you can be assured that it is a useful oil, non-fading, signed, real one, a desirable one of a decent size. Will it go up in value? Well, I think it will. Only time will tell. But if you thought these were expensive 5 years ago, as I did, or thought they were expensive even a year ago, with inflation and the fact people are trying to buy tangible assets, these are movable assets, I think this is going to go up quite quickly. I would say it's going to go up faster than the 18th century pictures or the 19th century pictures. This is what they want. This is what the customers on the market is craving for. So if you want it, come and have a look and we can have a deal. Thank you very much.